James Rhodes is Tony Stark's best friend, and James Rhodes helps Tony Stark sometimes. Virginia Plant is the secretary to the Tony Stark, and she made Tony Stark live when Obadiah Stane attacked him. Obadiah Stane is kind of bad, and he attacked Tony Stark because Tony Stark said, "I don't want to make weapons to kill people."
Utopia is a society where people with problems do not exist and is the type of society we should strive to achieve. If you really want to understand what utopia is, you should read the book Utopia. The word utopia is first used by Thomas More, the author of the book Utopia. In it, the author wrote two words, o and topos, which means not in place or combined, to create a new word, utopia. It means a place that does not truly exist, which means, in the author's book, a place full of happiness.
In Shilgok, a small city located in North Gyeongsang Province, South Korea, a sports complex was recently built. There are 8 athletics tracks and tennis courts and 1 soccer stadium. 35 billion won was put into this sports complex. However, even though a large amount of money was put into it, this sports complex isn't doing its job well. It actually meets most needs required for national championships, but none of them were held there. The only championship that was held in this sports complex was amateur soccer championship. In the example, tax was not used wisely. Many people do talk about how bad the government spends tax, but the way the government collects tax is also what the citizens should care about. More than just wasting tax like the example, there are fundamental problems in South Korean tax collection system. First of all, income tax intervals have to be fixed. South Korea has selected a progressive tax rate system in which tax rate gets higher as income increases. The basic form of this system is very efficient. However, there is an irony in the system. As you can see in this chart, 38% of tax rate is applied to people who make more than 150 million won a year. This also means that if someone makes 150 billion won, his or her tax rate will be the same as a person who makes 150 million won. Even though there is a big difference in their yearly income, the percentage of tax they pay from their income is equal. Since there are so many people who makes more than 150 million won a year, there is a necessity of fixing this old income tax interval system. There is only one way to fix it, by increasing the number of intervals. Instead of applying 38% of tax to people who make more than 150 million won, we should subdivide the intervals. For example, apply 40% of tax rate to people who make more than 150 million won, but less than 300 million won. And apply 45% of tax rate to people who make more than 300 million won, but less than 450 million won, and so on. So, as you can see here, the irony of the income tax system can be resolved and tax can be collected in a more equitable way. The second problem South Korean tax collection system has is the irrationality of electricity tax and the difference between residential electricity price and industrial electricity price is the reason why. South Korea's policies on electricity are focused on supporting industries, since industries were one of the most important factors during South Korea's economic development. However, their support seems to be excessive. Industrial electricity price is much more cheaper than the residential electricity price. While it costs 120 won per kilowatt for residential use, it costs 76 won per kilowatt for industrial use, which is about 30% cheaper. Of course, it is obvious for the government to support corporations while the nation is in its developing stages. However, South Korea is not the case. South Korea is no longer a third world nation. Supporting developed corporations is a total waste of money. Now is the time to support the citizens instead of corporations. Therefore, raising industrial electricity price and reducing residential electricity price seems to be the rational solution. Thirdly, corporate tax is also a problem that has to be solved. Corporate tax is a type the corporations, which means companies, pay to the government. The nominal tax rate is 24.2%, which is an unadjusted tax rate. The problem is that effective tax rate is much more lower than that. Effective tax rate is the amount of tax corporations actually pay to the government after benefiting from government policies, favors, etc. For example, even though the nominal tax rate is 24.2%, Samsung Electronics only paid 15.6% after benefiting from government policies, which resulted in a 1,700 billion won reduction. Many people say that the reason why the government is doing this is because high tax rates might cause various limitations to corporations' activities. However, this is a wrong fact since there are so many successful corporations in many countries where tax rates are much higher, such as the United States, Japan, and Germany. Therefore, policies that benefit big corporations such as Samsung and Hyundai should be abolished. Then effective tax rates will get higher and the government will be able to collect more tax from corporations. As a result, reformation is necessary for a rational and equitable tax collection system. Increasing the number of income tax intervals, raising industrial electricity price, reducing residential electricity price, and lastly, abolishing policies that benefit corporations are the main policies the government should strive for. Solving those fundamental problems in South Korean tax collection system is definitely what the government should do for the economy and for the citizens. Thank you.
In the house there lived an old man who was always thinking about how to clear the garbage. So every day the old man tried to clear away the garbage, sifting and sorting, burning and burying. And every night the old man dreamed. He dreamed that he lived in a forest with full of wild things, like wild animals, beautiful birds, colorful flowers, and large trees. But when he awoke, the world outside was still the same. First, I'm going to tell you about who Ozzy was and how he was found. Next, I'm going to tell you Ozzy when he was at the medical school. Next, I'm going to tell you how Ozzy died. And last, why I chose this topic and my opinion about it. First, I'm going to tell you about who Ozzy was and how he was found. He was found by Helmut and his wife Erika Simon in Alps between Italy and Austria. They first thought it was a doll, but they were wrong. It was a dead man. So they go to the next hiker shelter to report their discovery. The man who owns the shelter calls the police right away.
Okay, I'm the last presenter, and you're free to go home after my speech. I think about all of us walking our own green mile, each in their own time. This is a famous quote from Stephen King's novel, The Green Mile. Well, the Green Mile is what the people of Cold Mountain Penitentiary call the death row. Well, this quote doesn't only apply to the book. It also applies to our lives. All people die at some point. The only difference is the time. Some die young and some die old, and they all try their best to live following their own values. Stephen King's The Green Mile it's more than just a fictional story like many other novels. It contains aspects and criticizes modern society and gives life lessons to the readers. Well, even though the narrator of the book is a prison guard named Paul Eddercombe, the book more focuses on a black giant prisoner named John Coffey. He's falsely accused of rape and murder of 2 children. Surprisingly, he's a miraculous character who can heal others. There's a very similar person in history who has similar characteristics with John Coffey, but is much more respected than him. This man, who even has the same initial with John Coffey, JC, is Jesus Christ. John Coffey and Jesus Christ are very much similar in terms of their ability and personality. They both care for others, they can both heal others, create miracles, and they both can bring death to life. At the end, they both sacrifice themselves for others. However, one is respected almost as God, while another is convicted of murder without even concrete evidence. The author criticized discrimination by race and religion by comparing these 2 different but similar characters. Well, the book indirectly mentions the judiciary system itself. Modern laws mostly have the basis of it is better to have 10 guilty people escape than to let 1 innocent person suffer. That's why the attorney needs a physical evidence to prove the defendant guilty, and the defendant can appeal if they claim to be innocent. In the book, even though the jury would have been educated people, they put John Coffey to death row only because of the stereotypes and his appearance. Well, he didn't even have physical evidence, and he wasn't even given a chance to appeal. It shows the hypocrisy of educated people, how they speak of equality and make unfair moves. John Coffey healed Paul's urinary tract infection. Later in the story, it is revealed that not only he cured his urinary infection, but also he took out all his sufferings and pains as well. As a result, Paul Edgecombe lived to more than 100 years old, but still doesn't have any serious health problems. Also, he was led to see all the people he loved pass away. The author leaves the question to the reader: can long life make you happy? Paul Edgecombe ends his narration by representing the author's own thoughts about his own question. We each owe a death, there are no exceptions. But sometimes, oh God, the Green Mile seems so long. Well, The Green Mile is a good book. Not only its story is amazing, but it also contains aspects and criticizes modern society, and its lessons can be very influential to those who live in modern lives. And these aren't the only messages that is given in this book. And this book is not the only one that contains hidden messages in it. Sometimes reading between the lines
This fantastical creature is the dragon. What do you recall when you first heard her name? Maybe you might recall the terrifying monster that exhorts all from innocent people, but maybe you might think about the holy godlike creature who gives blessings to us. Dragons have different meanings in different cultures. Therefore, dragons in different cultures symbolize different things. In Western culture, dragons are quite famous for stealing gold. According to the book The Hobbit, dragons become insane when they sense gold within a radius of 1 kilometer, and when they do, they go straight to take the gold.
Stories about vampires were just like other legends at first. They were spoken of, but not proven to be true. However, in the 18th century, during the time when the legends about vampires were starting to become systematized, people started to seriously believe in vampires' existence. At that time, Vlad Tepes and Elizabeth Bathory were famous for putting people in a panic. Vlad Tepes, who was a king of what is now Romania, enjoyed killing his captives from battles. During his dinner, he would bring out his prisoners and impale them on a stick until they died. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Bathory, who was a countess in Austria, believed that young women's blood was the source of eternal youth. She had killed more than 600 girls and virgins to get their blood and take baths in. Tepes and Elizabeth Bathory's inhumanity and strong obsession with blood increased people's fear and then encouraged people to think of them as monsters that were called vampires. Other than these two uncommon cases, disease had also contributed greatly to the original ideas of vampires. One of those diseases was called porphyria. People who had porphyria were very far from being attractive, beautiful, or strong. It is a genetic disease that has many symptoms. People who had porphyria suffered from stomach aches and anemia, and since they had trouble producing blood, their skin was very pale. Also, they had a hypersensitive reaction to sunlight, so their canines appeared more prominent. Their skin got blisters and peeled off. Their gums became weaker when they got exposed to sunlight, so their canines appeared more prominent. Today, we can cure porphyria by blood transfusion or depletion, but a long time ago, there was no other choice for the patients but to drink other people's blood. Normal blood relaxed their stomachache and nausea, and it lessened their reaction to sunlight. Porphyria patients were just unfortunate people who were born in the wrong century, and they had no reason to be neglected by other people. Unfortunately, porphyria patients were not the only ones who were despised by the world. People who were infected with rabies were also treated like monsters. The rabies virus is spread by mad dogs through their saliva. People who were infected with rabies became extremely sensitive to stimuli, so they became hateful of water, light, doors, and mirrors. In the past, people didn't have any idea of viruses and diseases, so they just thought vampires were cursed monsters that feared holy water, light, garlic, and mirrors. Like porphyria patients, rabid people were the outcasts of society. The vampire is the result of people's rationalization of extreme inhuman cruelty, which ended up creating a supernatural creature. By thinking of them as monsters, people somehow felt more tolerant about the atrocities of drinking other people's blood. However, the ones who suffered the most from the birth of the vampire were the ones who were called vampires. Before becoming vampires, they were already neglected by others because of their diseases. It wasn't their fault, they were just people who were born with an unwanted genetic disease or who were bitten by a crazy dog just out of bad luck. Through the history of vampire, we can learn one thing. Having a disease is neither a sin nor a curse. Therefore, we must respect everyone as human beings. Thank you for listening.
Did you heard about the theory of evolution by Charles Darwin? There are 7 evolutions that happened in our universe from the start of the Big Bang and how did us humans were made. Also, the reasons why all living things doesn't share the same face or type of body. What is evolution? The evolution is the process by which an organism becomes more sophisticated over time and it responses to its nature. Well, there's some controversy of the theory. Mostly the controversy of the theory is from religious groups because they believe that God has created the world.
In 1775, the revolutionaries captured the British army, leading to France enter the war on the American side in early 1778, thus evening the military strength with Britain. Spain and Dutch Republic also went to war with Britain over the next 2 years. In 1777, the revolutionaries captured control of each 13 colonial governments, set up a unified Congress, and formed the Continental Army. The following year, they declared independence as a new nation, the United States of America. In the 18th century, there were lots of... the Gothic literature was very popular in the 18th century. There were many famous books that contain Gothic elements, such as Bram Stoker's Dracula, Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. I'll give a brief introduction of some of these books to you. First, Bram Stoker's Dracula is considered one of the most famous pieces of Gothic literature, and because it fulfills all the characteristics of a Gothic novel, it is sometimes mentioned as the archetype of Gothic literature. It is a story where the protagonists such as Jonathan Harker, Mina Murray, and Dr. Van Helsing are on a quest to slay a vampire. Second, Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire is an outstanding novel based on a vampire named Louis, who tells his vampire life story to a reporter. This was the first book to tell a vampire story from the vampire's perspective. This allowed the readers to know that there was a lot more of being a vampire than humans think. This novel was actually created into a movie starring Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. Third, Jane Eyre is a story of a poor woman working as a governess in Thornfield Hill and eventually marries the master of the huge house. The big mansion encapsulates many Gothic themes. The house itself is dark, chilly, and gloomy. The mystery of Grace Poole and unexpected happenings add suspicion and excitement to the story. Jane Eyre was the first Gothic novel that I've ever read. Fourth, Frankenstein is a story about a monster created by a man named Victor Frankenstein. It is a tragic story of a monster struggling to experience the emotions of a human